Good morning, Dan and Amy. And Dan Hanninger, writing in the Wall Street Journal, tries to answer the question that I think a lot of people are asking. Why is there so little resistance to what is going on? Why is there so little resistance? How could cancel culture happen in a country with legally protected speech? Why has there been no defense of private property? Which, as he says, remains, believe it or not, a big idea in the minds of foreign-born citizens, from taxi drivers to builders of new companies. The quick collapse of America's elites under this left-wing offensive is a striking and historic event. How did it happen so fast? Why is there so little resistance? Henninger argues, I think rightly, it was a long time coming. It's been a slow, well, not that slow really in context, but seemingly slow and steady march of the left through all of our cultural institutions. I mean, were you paying attention? I mean, when I was on a college campus 25 years ago, what was the big topic? Speech codes. We had something akin to safe spaces at Northwestern, or certainly the advocacy for them. But this is when Donna Shalala was up in Madison pushing speech codes. And nobody did anything. The acts of denial as liberal traditions eroded were mostly petty self-interests. If you didn't lose your job, you're okay. This is what silence is compliance really looks like. Exactly. That's what it really looks like. Silence is compliance. Silence is violence, aiding and abetting violence. That's what the left has been doing for the last 50 years, which is why they now, in their customary fashion, are projecting it onto conservatives. Liberal tolerance, their one cardinal virtue, degraded into rote acceptance, writes Henninger. Yes, tolerance and acceptance, not synonyms. Two different words with two different implications. They claimed to be defending evolving standards, but eventually there were none. The descent into irrational and illogical claims was impossible to miss. It became obvious that wokeness had turned into a weapon, but liberal leadership blandly let it happen. So now the idea of a functioning consensus about morality of any sort has been erased. By the way, this is an argument that Shelby Steele brilliantly made in White Guilt almost 2 decades ago.
I've got to read that book.
You do. So there's no functioning consensus about morality, then no one has moral authority. And as Henninger concludes, about all that's left is smiley face liberalism with your hate has no home here sign in your yard. Smile. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend and best-selling author, Amity Shlaes. She's the board chair of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, winner of the Hayek Prize, and best-selling author of The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression, as well as Great Society, A New History. And I understand from Amity that a Texas businessman bought a copy of her most recent book on the Great Society for every member of Congress, and it has been delivered. So now the only thing left to do is find someone who will read it to them. Maybe, Amity, you could do story time with Amity for members of Congress so they could ask questions about the complicated concepts in your work.
Not that complicated.
Well,
thank you. I'm very glad to be here with you guys.
Well, they're not that sophisticated. That's the issue. But yes, no, so congratulations on the continued success of your book. And what do you say to Dan Henninger's distillation of smiley face liberalism?
Well, Dan is one of the sharpest analysts we have in the United States. So I would just kind of add to that. I think the free speech argument is just one argument. The teacher said something, the parents want the teacher fired, the teacher has free speech rights. Okay, but what if the teacher is also correct? For example, when a teacher says, we care about all humans, not just one group. That's correct. Well, the teacher will get dinged for insensitivity in a tough week. Okay, the teacher will be defended because she has the right to say that. And then she may still lose her job. Let's just say the teacher was correct. One, she's a moral leader, so it's a moral abdication.
Right, and right. So this moral abdication has been going on, as I argue, and I'm not the only one, in all of our civic institutions. This has created this cultural rot, and so how do you reclaim moral authority? How do you reclaim just even, as you say, the truth of the statement that everybody's life matters, and in our country's tradition, we're all equal in the eyes of God, and we all should be equal and equally protected under the law. Why is that right? I don't have any moral authority. You don't have any moral authority. So how do you regain any moral authority? How do you regain any consensus on what the truth is?
You know, it's not us to prescribe, but I would imagine that where responsibility will return will be partly from the churches, where there is some morality. And one of the problems with college is it's kind of a spiritual vacuum often, and kind of weird junk comes in because extreme progressivism or extreme emphasis on race is just a new religion, right? And a less logical one than the old religions that we have. So I do actually believe that. Oh, did you say something, Amy?
No. I was just wanted to talk about, defunding of the police. You said that this context of this concept started in the 1960s.
Well, Chicago is a huge part of this story. Chicago was the star and guinea pig of community action in the 1960s. And, some of your older listeners will remember that or hearing about it. One thing I'm thinking of, which was covered in an article in the Atlantic magazine that's online by James Allen McPherson, was a $1 million grant to the Woodlawn organization, where money then flowed to two gangs, the Blackstone Rangers, and I think it was the Devil's Disciples. Anyway, Chicagoans will correct me. Anyway, why do we send money to gangs? Well, two reasons. One was maybe if they got jobs, the members, they would stop fighting each other. That's so there would be money for jobs. Okay, it's a lesser evil, maybe a good idea. Two, we had kind of a police vacuum in the 60s. That's because we were very hard on the police. The police were problematic, and we were real hard on them. And we didn't defund them. We had Mayor Daley, Richard J. But we did kind of sideline them in our philosophy and say we need to reenfranchise people in poor neighborhoods, and we need to do it through community action. And that community action needs to be funded by Washington. That money did not come from Mayor Daley. It came from Sergeant Shriver, also an erstwhile Chicagoan and the head of the poverty office. It turned out to be kind of a weird idea, because if you live on the South Side, you're not sure you want to be policed by gangs. It's
right.
not Medellin. In
Right.
Medellin, actually, the international community spends money to defund the violent gangs, right? That is, sorry, to defund is the wrong word, to make tame the gangs. Chicago is a place where we believe in the rule of law. Maybe we need to change practices or teachings. Maybe we need to change the police. But it is a city of law, not gangs. So everyone was embarrassed about this, and there were hearings. How did a gang get money from Washington? But that was just emblematic of the whole culture, where we funded also plenty of social workers, for example, in lieu of, funding police, and maybe tried to sideline police. And the social workers didn't really help people either. We're talking about the people who we want to help, which are poor people, some of color, some not. So Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the great philosopher and senator who went through this in real time. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, if you've ever heard that name, was the first canceled intellectual.
When he wrote his 1965 report on the black family.
Right, because he dared cultural appropriation to analyze families of a different ethnicity out of his own experience, by the way, because his father was an alcoholic. So he was writing about the absence of the father and therefore trouble in the family and policy that might facilitate father departure, which existed through welfare. Anyway, he commented quite astutely that through our giant social worker outlay, which came out of our community action, which was the funding came out of concern over misery, poor policing, and, by the way, fear of more riots, we were feeding the horses to feed the sparrows. That is, you end up funding a great social work establishment of working class, professional class, social worker type people, a bureaucracy with a lot of rules who don't necessarily effectively prevent crime or help in any other way the people whom they're meant to serve, at least not optimally for the scale of the investment.
Yeah, but you know what? As I like to say about Illinois and Chicago, it's not broken, it's fixed. That
Oh, I love that.
the system actually operated and operates like a lot of people want it to operate. It wasn't intended to lift people out of poverty. It was intended to create a poverty industry by which you develop beholden constituencies that you use to maintain and expand your political power. And Michael Lind from the University of Texas, who argues that the great divide in this country is the college degree, makes the point about democratic patronage machines that run America's post-industrial cities. And the rentiers and firms who feed off of the public sector unions, college-educated professionals, public and nonprofit sectors, they're all part of the Democrat ecosystem. And what they fail to do, and why the cities are burning, is they fail to figure out how to pay off three groups that make up much of the population in 2020 big urban Democrat cities: the black poor, poor immigrants, and recent college graduates. And that's who you see on the streets. But they've figured out how to pay off generations before them and create an industry and political power around them, which is what sustained Democrat control of every city bigger than San Diego for at least the last 50 years. For the most part, with the intermittent Rudy Giuliani or Richard Riordan. So it seems to me we need to be perhaps more pointed about the purposeful nature of what these policymakers and moneyed interests attempted to do and have done in the big cities, and now they just need to figure out how they buy off those that are revolting against them in their own camp.
Well, okay, but you mentioned property rights before. I think the evidence suggests this was a terrible learning curve, right? In the 60s, first we did social work, then we paid for housing, that is rentals, then we did, and we eventually came to, can't these people get college degrees and be homeowners? And that really helped all poor Americans, black and white, to begin to be able to own homes. Nowadays, we tend to say, supporting homeownership didn't work because sometimes that was corrupt and people didn't pay their mortgages, and that had to do with 2008. But that obscures the bigger success of homeownership as the American way for people, whatever ethnicity. That's one of the things I cover in Great Society. What a happy change it was for people to move out of the project and do urban homesteading. So dollar for dollar, I'd rather spend money rather than buying people off to make them quiescent. I'd rather allow them to accumulate capital.
Totally agree. I totally agree. That's what we should do. I'm just arguing that that's not what we're doing, as you argue, and I'm arguing that it's purposeful that we're not doing it. It's not, they're good intentions. They just haven't figured out it's not working after 50 years.
Right. Well, yeah. And, the Chicago story, I part of my book is about Martin Luther King, because he actually came to Chicago to work on housing, as some will remember. And MLK was quite a philosopher, and you can practically see his mind clicking as he's turning over, what do you fight for tenant rights or home ownership? Maybe houses are what matter. That's one reason he marched in suburbs where it was hard for blacks to buy houses.
Right.
Maybe houses matter more than some kind of play game socialism a la Bertolt Brecht and European film. Play game socialism is not American. We are not a class war country. There is no lower class or middle class. I don't even think there's an elite, the word that's used so much now. There's just people who can move up and down and need certain tricks, talents, or skills to do so.
Amy, from your perspective as a historian, because there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of months about 2020 versus 1968. Do you see 2020 and the divisions in this country as more profound and more dangerous than they were in the 60s, or perhaps even at any time since the Civil War?
I don't know about since the Civil War, because we've had some terrible times.
Yes.
I mean, think of the riots in Chicago subsequent to the wars, and think of the sorrows of the Black migration. But it's a tough one, because actually things are better now for most people, including people of color, than they were in the 60s. So what is it that's missing? I think what's mostly missing is a sense of participation. I'm going to say one thing that you'll find odd, but I blame our handling. That would be America's, including Republican-led handling of 2008 is a problem, because there was a very cynical bailout in the financial crisis of the big rich firms. And the little people sometimes got help and sometimes didn't. We shouldn't have bailed out those firms. There shouldn't be special rules for big firms. If they fail, they fail. And that taught us all, that America was all about who you know and deals. A Chicago on a bad day, right? And not about markets, effort, and prices. And that trickled way down. The other thing I would say is we all who send our kids to college say, why don't you study accounting? Why don't you study engineering? And one of them studies film. Well, and we say, well, he's like that or she's like that. Ha ha, move on, flip the burger on the grill. You know what? This is not benign. We are abdicating when we let them get that kind of education, and then you hear they're afraid of math. Well, anyone can do math. Any idiot can do math. They can just do it a bit more slowly. So we kind of as parents abdicate and create these undereducated children, pitifully undereducated in the colleges when they go to college, right? So it used to be if you had a college degree, you had to have some respect for statistics. That is no longer the case.
She is Amity Shlaes, board chair of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, winner of the Hayek Prize, and best-selling author of The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression, and her new book, Great Society, A New History, which every member of Congress has now. So ask your member of Congress if he or